Welcome to Athletes and Entrepreneurs, the Alumni Journey. I'm Rob Finkelstein, founder and CEO of Alumni Direct, where we've created a platform to help athletes and other alumni network and connect with each other and tap into various resources in health and finance and career. But more importantly, this podcast is all about athletes' transition to sport. It's such a major issue today between mental health, financial literacy, careers, and we want to make a difference. So we interview former college and professional athletes, and we talk about their transition out of sport ultimately into successful business leadership and entrepreneurship. So excited today to have Ali Cox. How you doing, Ali?
I'm great. Nice to be here. Thanks, Rob.
It's a pleasure. So Ali, I'm excited because Ali is an Olympian. Okay. She was a silver medalist in the Olympics. She was a rower in college, probably before that as well. But what did
No,
university? Oh,
I was a
no, that's right.
walk-on.
Okay. Walk on. Okay. That's going to be even a better story. So she was a walk on at University of San Diego. Ultimately, she was an Olympian, silver medalist. And then when she got out of sports, she got into consulting with IMG and doing different things in the event space and ultimately in the fashion space. And then kind of got back into her passion as an entrepreneur. She's the founder and CEO of Noble West. It's a marketing firm that's kind of geared towards the farming community. And she'll tell you all about that later. So, Ali, talk about growing up playing sports and how that shaped you leading up into college.
Yeah, sure. Sports was, I'm from a small farming town in Central California, and sports is definitely it's a Friday Night Lights kind of community here. And I grew up in a very athletic family where I had two grandfathers that played college sports, and my whole family's played sports. And I followed suit. I was a 12-time letterwoman at Turlock High School and was voted most athletic. So definitely knew everything about being on a team, leading a team, being the youngest on the team, captaining different teams. So teamwork is definitely something that's like in my blood. I love winning as a team, and I would argue I'd rather win big as a team than individually any day of the week. So I was already kind of a well-versed athlete and very coachable. So when I walked on to the University of San Diego rowing team, really the coach just had to teach me how to row. I already knew how to compete. I'm very ambitious. I'm a hard worker, again, a great team player, very coachable, but I had no idea what the sport of rowing was because we don't have that here where I'm from. And so I learned how to row. And so I walked on the team my sophomore year at University of San Diego in 1998, and I made the 2004 Olympic team in Athens. It was a fast switch. And, in speaking in rowing communities, I always say the thing that I sort of grieve the most is that I never had the opportunity to just learn how to row for fun. I only learned how to row to compete and to compete fast because I learned how to row in September and already had a race in November. So it was definitely a very quick trajectory. And I think I just kind of had the athletic tenacity and ability to pick it up.
That's interesting. And what other sports did you play?
Tennis, softball, soccer. I was a skier. I played basketball. So lots
And
of
you didn't want to take any of that into college as well?
I thought about softball, but I think at that time I was kind of a little burned out after 10 years of travel softball.
I know that you always talk about this. My son played travel ball and I was a manager. So we, especially be down just like California, like being down here in South Florida, just you're constantly like practicing games, tournaments, the whole thing. So it does take a
Yeah.
lot out of you.
And now I'm doing that with my kids and it's really fun. But,
That's
it
great.
definitely, but it prepared me. It prepared me for life on the national team, honestly, because I just knew that if you want to compete at the highest level, you've got to work really hard. And if you have to work really hard, you have to dedicate and do sacrifice. But I just loved, my parents never had to push me. I just was completely self-motivated. And I would argue that is probably one of my greatest skills and tools today as an entrepreneur is that I feel very comfortable leading. I feel very comfortable when we are not in the lead. And, I have different ways to cope with different scenarios that frankly, I learned from years of sports.
Yeah. And I mean, I talk about that all the time. It's such
Mm-hmm.
the athlete DNA, the skill set. I mean, it sets you up so well of everything you do. And obviously as a leader today, being a CEO of a company, all those, and we'll talk about that a little more later. So once you're in college and talk about, was there any kind of education about transition out of sport? I mean, things are changing today, but back then, was there just classes and not just the one-day workshop?
Do you mean like transitioning from college to the national team or the national team to real life?
More like just to real life in general, like for all college athletes. I mean, just getting that opportunity, like once they're done.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I, Transitioning from my senior year of college to the national team was sort of a joke. I mean, like my counselor at University of San Diego was like, well, what are you going to do next year? And I said, I'm going to be a rower on the national team. He's like, well, that's not a job. I was like, well, it is to me. And I was like, and I'm really good. And he's like, yeah, okay, whatever that means. And he's like, do you going to have a job? And I was like, you know what? Screw you. I'm going to figure this out just like I do everything else. So I do distinctly remember that conversation. And then I went to the national team and I moved across the country and I kind of was invited to the team selection camp and I did get a job in marketing right away. I had many internships while I was living and training in Princeton, New Jersey, but that transition from, I think the biggest transition was the transition from the Olympics to then retirement in real life. And for me, I always say like, I am the exception, not the rule, because I already had a very clear idea of what I wanted my career to look like. I knew I wanted to live in New York. I knew I wanted to be successful in consulting and sports management or events or what have you. I had probably already had 10 internships at that point over the course of college and the 4 years that I was training for the Olympics. So that was an easier transition for me. I interviewed for my job. We had one day off in the summer of 2004, and I flew to a job interview and kept in touch with the hiring manager, and then kind of knocked on their door after I got home from the closing ceremonies, and just kind of got into that. Got right into it. So for me, I am definitely the exception because I was so ambitious and I also was sort of prepared. But of course, even though I had a much smoother transition than most of my teammates, if not all of them, it was still sort of that feeling of, wow, I'm 26 years old and I am interviewing for jobs that 22-year-olds are trying to get out of college. And even I just recall being like, I am so behind. And my goodness, it was like behind by 4 years. So obviously not that big of a deal, but at the time it felt like a big deal.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's the biggest challenge, and it's different with across sports. Obviously, I mean, I think that depending on the school, the division, I think like if you talk about like say Division 3 and Division 2 athletics, sometimes most of the athletes don't really see a path to professional sports. Depending on what the sport is, and even
Mm-hmm.
on the ones that do, and we might have talked about this a little bit offline, but I mean, when you look at rowing, we look at track and field, you look at swimming, some of the other sports where there's professional presence, but not as much. So I think those athletes are more prepared to just kind of thinking about, okay, what their future is going to look like.
Mm-hmm.
But it
You
doesn't make it
know,
any easier.
I think the one thing that I would say, and I have counseled many people, many other athletes over the last 20 years about, is one of the most incredible opportunities that, frankly, I just raised my hand and took was as we were doing all of these sort of alumni events, or we were doing like PR or promotional things within the rowing community with retired rowers or just press events or whatnot. I wrote a thank you note to every single person who hosted us. And I did create really important personal relationships with people that had been out of the sport for decades and were business owners and were people of influence because they had already made it professionally. And that also is why I wanted to move to New York, because I had this incredible network because so many rowers train in the East Coast and then they all go to New York. That was probably the main reason I went. And I created some relationships that I can't even begin to think what my life would look like if I hadn't had leaned into those. But I would argue I was also somewhat giving of my time and my energy and my spirit. And I would share about the team. I would invite them to practices. I would follow up. I would take them up on their offers and invitations to go to their small little clubs and row with them. Or I would go to their kids' races, or when, everybody's always asking somebody on the national team, can you talk to my daughter's rowing team, or can you do this or whatever? I would actually say yes. And most of my teammates, I think, were more like protective of their rest or hydration and kind of all the things, which are obviously important. But I just sort of felt like that is part of my personality, but it is absolutely what was part of my special sauce. And it is why I am so well networked within my sport. And by the way, once you become networked within your sport, people are friends with other people in other sports. And then you like the
100%.
cycle just grows. And that is part of growing and building successful business empires. And that's what I do literally every day now. So I think it came very naturally to me, but I do know that while I was training, when you're like kind of your star is sort of the brightest, right? As an athlete, that is when you're getting ready to go to the Olympics or World Championships or World Cups, or you're representing anybody, that's when you need to make sure and like be very giving with your spirit. You can't always do it with your time because obviously there's so much rest and practice that goes with everything, but just being emotional and inviting people into your journey, whether you're texting or keeping in touch or sharing, that I think is something that I just wish more athletes knew how to do. I don't think they understand that that's also part of being in the sport, is like sort of the plus part. And that to me is like, for like, call it my off the water work, but it was critical. And I will also argue I was able to personally build relationships with people who have spent millions, tens of millions of dollars funding our teams over the last 20 years because they received a really warm olive branch from me. So I would just, any athletes listening out there, I would just say, make time to build your network and rapport, not only just with your teammates, because those will become your friends and colleagues as you move forward, but also just the people around your sport.
Yeah, I mean, she already answered my question. Like my next question always like talk about the importance of networking, connecting while you're still active as a player in the sport, and you pretty much hit on all that. It is so important. I think that take advantage of it. You know, we always talk about too. It's never too early to start. And the one thing I love that you said there too is just about kind of giving back and having that giving mentality, because I think that's so important. But even back to when you're in high school, you talk about playing all these sports. You've got all these teammates. You got their parents. Yeah, I think if not even athletes, but I mean in general too, people just work as a young age and start building that network because it is so important. And you know, Ali just brought up all these great points about the people in the rowing community. The other thing you touched on, which I'll kind of go back to, is just cross sports. Because one thing we've talked about recently is that I think there's such an opportunity. A lot of times you'll see, let's say the NFL players, they're just with the football players, and the baseball with the baseball, but there's such an opportunity across sports. So you've got that same DNA, the leadership, everything that we talked about here, and it needs to happen. So what have you seen on that? I mean, you kind of briefly mentioned it, but with the rowing community getting involved with like other sports or vice versa.
Well, I mean, let's just be real. Like, if you do that at the Olympics and if you do that at college, you're going to be invited to more parties. So why wouldn't you want to do that? Let's just be pragmatic here. But yeah, an athlete's an athlete. No, I don't know. An athlete's an athlete, but I'll tell you, the athletes that competed in races versus games, they're a little different. They're wired a little differently.
Right.
So when you're in a race and it's how fast you can go for a certain distance, you are a different kind of wired athlete than you are for a tennis player who you get to like take breaks and sit down, or a baseball player, you know. So I think that a lot of times those kind of like sports kind of find each other. Although, you know, I play tennis very actively now and I love all sports, but definitely like the athletes that are the racers typically are a little bit more serious. But I just think that there's no harm that can possibly come from like cross pollination, and also just like kind of building out a network, regardless of kind of what sport the athlete played.
Yeah, no, definitely. So let's talk a little bit about alumni engagement. We'll talk about two things, and one from a college perspective, and then I'll get into more of the from like the Olympic side and the professional side of rowing. So when you were in school, were they back? Were alumni coming back and mentoring? Not just for, I always say they'll come back for like the homecoming games and all, but were people coming back, and was the school engaging and bringing alumni to mentor athletes and kind of be around their programs?
No.
Are you seeing any more of that today? Like for example, like are they reaching out to you or some of these other alumni athletes now and trying to bring them back?
Not really to mentor me. I am now obviously being asked to mentor a lot of folks. I am working on a mentorship. I've been assigned a mentee to be a mentor for a mentee through US Rowing, which is exciting. I'm really proud of our national governing body for exploring that. I do know that there are several kind of USOC programs. I think Visa shepherded several programs. So there's definitely more than there was 20 years ago when I was coming out. So I think that's been great.
How's the alumni community of Olympians? Is there much of that of just getting back together over the years and different events? And again, not even necessarily specific. Well, I guess specifically to rowing, but then across again other Olympians.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, there's definitely get things in the mail. I think it's really by sport primarily, unless you serve like on a board position or an advisory seat, which I definitely recommend to do. I haven't had the opportunity yet just because I've been so busy building my own business, but there's a lot of really incredible people who do kind of serve in those like elected roles. But I know for us, it's really I'm very active in my rowing community. So like I have a board seat on the National Rowing Foundation, which funds the national team. I've been asked to be on several different committees through US Rowing. For us, there's big regattas. So, they're always looking for alumni participation and organizing support for in rowing. It'd be the San Diego Crew Classic in the spring, or the Head of the Charles Regatta in the fall, and lots of other regattas. So I think that for us, the biggest thing is just sort of making time to like lean into your network, especially for women that are my age in their mid 40s. Most of us have children at home. We probably are very dynamically working in our careers and whatnot. So it's definitely a challenge. It's something that every single time I go to any sort of alumni activity, I always just leave with my cup full. I just remember how much I love these people. And the truth is, like, I have spent thousands of hours, both just casually, whether they were roommates or friends or on the same team or traveling internationally for months on end or whatnot, and training together. Like, I have thousands of hours already socked in these friendships and relationships. So when we do see each other, it's literally like no time has passed, which is probably one of the most incredible gifts that I could receive. And so like investing the time to go is always worth it.
Oh, yeah, I agree. I mean, I still go back. I'll go back to my hometown and get together with my high school buddies that I ran track and cross country with, and it's just like you said, it's priceless. And I mean that you could just pick up a conversation 20 years later and you're talking about like different things.
Absolutely. I mean, you were like running with those people for 3 hours a day and like hitting tons of miles together, right? And then also like riding the bus together and like having a lot of your biggest like personal victories and failures together. That's just like, it's something so special.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I always ask the questions, and if you listen to any, watch the podcast, you'll be prepared for it.
I love them.
So let's go ahead and we're going to go back in time.
Okay.
What advice, 10 words or less, would you give to freshman Ali at San Diego?
Be patient, be kind, follow up, sleep, drink less alcohol. So that's 3. So I have 3 more words. And then I would just say, trust the process. I was so hungry for expansion and explosion in my personal, like, in professional and athletic life. I had a hard time being patient. So I wish I would have trusted the process a little bit more. I probably would have had a little less anxiety.
I'd imagine. And I'm sure coming from a farming community and being in a bigger community where you're at school was probably a little bit of a culture shock too.
Yeah. I mean, I'm from a great town, so it's not like I kind of grew up in the boonies, but for a while we did. But it was just awesome to be able to like meet new people and compete at the highest level. And so for sure.
That's great. Okay. And then fast forward to senior Ali.
Senior Ali at University of San Diego.
Yeah.
10 words.
Yeah, we'll try to
get
keep it to
yourself 10, in a single skull to get better technique. That's 11.
That works. That works. But bottom line is it's always fun because you never know like what okay, so what, and the people that don't know about the question are like, so what am I going to say? Do I talk about the PG version? Do I talk about the R version? back to the college
for
days.
Sure. I was so fit. I mean, my senior year, I was so fit. I did 2 double workouts a day. So I rode with the team in the morning, and then I would run after practice, and then we lifted as a team in the afternoon. And then oftentimes I would try to go out in a single. But if I would have spent more time in a smaller boat, my technique would have been so much better going into the national team. So that would have been helpful.
I'm sure. Was there, sometimes I touch on it, talk about NIL and name, image, likeness. Is that going on with rowing today? Like in the schools? I mean, are you seeing it?
Yeah, no, because it's a team sport. It's a team sport. And frankly, in a rowing boat, the more anonymous the team is, the people are, the better it typically rows. So There's not really superstar. Like, of course, there's superstars, and how you become a superstar is either you have incredible technique that is because you started rowing a single when you were a child, like many of my teammates on the Olympics, or you have incredible strength and endurance. And typically that is identified by how well you perform in a single or a double or a pair, or for my case, how well you perform on the rowing machine. And on the rowing machine, had a top 10 erg in college. And even though I went to a tiny college that only had like 18 rowers compared to, the bigger universities that had 100 plus people.
So with that many, is that so they have multiple teams, or just like a varsity and JV, or how does that work?
Oh, like the bigger, they might have a 1V, a 2V, a 3V. There might be a JV boat. There might be a 2 JV boat. There might be an 8. There might be a 4. They'll have novice 1, 2, or 3. So they just have many different iterations, and so there's just a lot of seats to fill.
Okay, like how many were on your boat when you were in the Olympics?
In the Olympics, I was in the women's 8, and so that meant there were 8 rowers and 1 coxswain.
Okay, gotcha. All right. See, we're learning a little bit about it. I think we talked offline. We're talking about that movie. What was that movie again?
Boys in the Boat.
Yeah, Boys in the Boat. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for
it's the world's greatest sport.
I mean, for us non-rowers, we learned a lot just from that movie, and now we're learning more from Ali here.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely the world's best sport. I mean, and if you think about every single corporate office there is in the world, there is some sort of teamwork poster. And in that poster is the poster of a rower, of a crew, because in order to make it go straight, to set up, to not flip, to go fast, you have to have incredible teamwork.
Yeah, oh, for sure. I remember growing up as a kid, I grew up in New Jersey, but my whole family was from Philadelphia. And I always remember going, what's the name of that river? The Schuylkill River. Yeah, and just seeing all those row houses where I guess where the different colleges would practice and all that, I guess, or perform.
I won my first national championship medal when I was 21 years old on the Schuylkill.
There you go. All right. So for all my Philadelphia cousins, Ali was out there winning national championships.
It's a terrible place to row, but I do love it.
Yeah, I'm sure.
It's like rowing in a bathtub, because the whole thing, there's just concrete walls on all sides and on the bottom. So it's literally when there's a wake, it's literally like the bathtub of the water just floats back and forth. So it's an incredibly historical, beautiful, and very special place to row. But as far as the quality of the water, it's truly like a bathtub. It's terrible.
Yeah. And and you said where were the Olympics again that you were at?
In Athens.
In Athens. Okay. I'm sure that was pretty picturesque in what you were doing there.
Yeah, it was incredible.
That's awesome. So let's talk about transition out of sport. And again, this is something we talked about a little bit offline. And, sometimes there's a documentary called The Weight of Gold, and it was narrated by Michael Phelps and, I think Sean, the snowboarder.
Sean White.
Sean White. Yeah. Thanks. And then other ones as well. But do you see with the Olympians, is there more struggles you see, or think it's just across all sports? It just seems like you've trained your whole life sometimes maybe for that short-term event, and then it just seems like you come back home and I guess unless you're have that notoriety, maybe being gold medalist, silver medalist, is that some of the challenges that people face coming out, transitioning out?
I think it is, if that's your entire identity. So if the only thing if that's the only part of your kind of persona you've grown, or if that's the only thing you've been working on, and that's all who you are, then that is a problem. That's a problem for any sport.
100%.
Particularly probably even, exacerbated if you are in a sport like rowing that doesn't have, much media attention, doesn't have a ton of money flying through it, for sure. But that's where, it's on the athlete. It's not on the coaches to do that. And the thing that I just remember learning is when you're on the national team or the Olympic team or an elite team of any type, it's not the coach's job to develop future leaders or incredible people. It's to utilize the tools that they have from that toolkit to make the boat go as fast as possible, or make the crew, or make whomever, whatever the sport is, as fast as possible, versus a collegiate coach, where they're supposed to be they also have some responsibility of building humans and, building future leaders and to represent the university well. It is so different once you get into the elite and the national. And that's where I'd say it's on you to continue to grow and evolve and self-educate. And if you don't, you're probably going to burn out pretty quickly. But if you continue to find other passions and lean into other passions, then there's definitely a lot of incredible things that can happen. I mean, there's a lot of perks. There's a lot of perks about coming home from the Olympics with some hardware, and I got to
Sure.
experience that. It was fun. And even today, like, people meet you, they're like, oh my gosh, you're an Olympian. I love the Olympics. And it's like, oh, it's so great. I love
Yeah.
that you love the Olympics. But the harder thing, I think, is for athletes who train and then they make it to the final cut and then they get cut. That is
Yeah.
like, there can be some collateral damage there. And that's where I always say, like, sure, you have to have most of your eggs in one basket to make this thing because it is so intense. But there also has to be, like, I hope you're reading, or I hope you're self-educating, or I hope, you are following, you've determined that you have other interests as well. Because otherwise I do think you are setting yourself up for success, like for failure, because it isn't forever. But maybe you're just going to become a coach, and
Right.
not just, but maybe you're going to transition to becoming a coach and of your sport. And that's obviously what most people do.
Any other words of advice to athletes as they transition out of sport?
Make friends, keep in touch, be friendly. That's the biggest thing. And I think just the opportunities, and ask for help. But I think a real hard thing, especially if you're coming from a team sport, is like, there will be no coach that tells you what time and how to do everything ever again. Maybe for individual athletes who probably have a little bit more autonomy with how they train, or maybe they hire their coaches and fire their coaches, there's a little difference there. And they typically have a longer kind of track to compete at. But yeah, I would just sort of say, like, you got to build all sides of yourself, not just your athletic self.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. I always like to talk about next steps for athletes as they're graduating college, and you talk about careers and jobs. As a CEO and a former athlete, talk a little bit about um, how employers think of athletes and like to hire athletes.
Well, I think two things. I think employers love athletes because athletes can typically handle pressure, and business is pressure. I really only can be talking about the business side of things right now, because that's where I am. But I think that I always love it when athletes apply. I always know that they're probably a good teammate. They probably can handle pressure. They can probably handle details. They understand how to do things on time. Those are sort of some inherent gifts. Teamwork is typically part of there. Those are things that I love in people that work at our agency. Now, the challenge is sometimes athletes come in thinking everything should be handed and organized and told, sort of like when you're on a team. The balls are over here, the net's over here, the team's here, you're on this team, you're assigned to do this. Like, so there sometimes can be some hand raising issues in the beginning. But for the most part, I think there's a reason why. I think that, what's the staggering stat? It's like something like 90% of all women in all C-suite roles in Fortune 500 or Fortune 1000 companies were competitive Division One, like, athletes. I think there's a reason for it, and that's because we can handle the pressure.
That's interesting. I didn't know that stat.
Oh
That's
yeah,
good to know.
the stats in that area are staggering.
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's crazy.
yeah.
So let's you got out and you got into the world of IMG, but so ultimately let's talk about your passion in starting your marketing firm, Noble
Okay,
West.
yeah. I started it in 2007. It was originally, the name was Ali Cox and Company, and I started just as a marketing freelancer, and then that was, my goodness, that was 18 years ago. And now I started being as more of a generalist because I had been working in sports and entertainment and music and fashion. And then it was about 12 years ago when I said, I really care about food and I love agriculture, and I just don't understand why people don't understand more about their food. I'm a fifth generation farmer on both sides of my family. So obviously, growing up close to the land and close to kind of how food is grown, packaged, processed, and shipped is something that, those were my summer jobs, and that's also my family's livelihood. So it was about 12 years ago when I said, gosh, I love marketing and I love PR and I love doing everything that involves promotions, but I'm going to start doing it for something I really care about, which is food and agriculture. And I'm so glad I did. And now our agency does international work. We work across sustainability projects, climate forward projects. We work in different types of agriculture, regenerative agriculture, organic agriculture, and different food consumer brands. So if you think about kind of what's in your produce aisle or in your meat aisle or your rice or anything that's, I would say, a hero food ingredient. So the hero meaning that like the actual food is the ingredient. It's not mixed into other stuff necessarily, unless it's an ingredient. If there's less than 3 ingredients in whatever it is, that's definitely a potential Noble West client. So our clients are rice farmers and rice processors, almond processors, hydroponic herb brands, cherry brands. We work across about 15 different commodities.
And all across the country, like different types of companies based wherever.
And internationally.
Okay. Okay. And then, so are you doing like you do like the packaging and the branding, the awareness across like, commercials and things like that too?
Yeah, packaging, retail marketing, websites, social media, content, naming. A lot of times people like create a whole business and then they don't have a name for it. So we'll develop the name, the logo, so kind of all the creative and brand identity work, and then also promotions for it.
Okay. That's great. I mean,
Yeah.
you always see these different stories about, I mean, I guess you watching Shark Tank. A lot of times you'll see these different companies coming on and different types of products that they're offering.
Yeah, for sure.
So how do people find you?
The best place is probably LinkedIn. I'm super active and I would love to hear from anybody, any of your listeners, particularly if you're an athlete trying to figure out what's next. Happy to tell my story, happy to connect. But LinkedIn, where you find Ali Cox, ALICOX, or else our website, wearenoblewest.com, is a great place as well.
That sounds great. People should definitely reach out to Allie. Such great insight. And I talk about that on each podcast. I mean, every podcast, all the guests have, I call them nuggets, have some type of nugget that's great.
Yeah.
And we certainly want to promote more and more people watching and listening to these episodes, and just getting something out of it. I think I always say if we could help one person, but I mean, obviously we want to help a lot more than that. So you can find us at alumnidirect.com. The podcast is on Athletes, Entrepreneurs, Alumni Journeys on our YouTube channel, as well as across all the different podcast networks, Spotify, etc. And just, reach out, follow, like, all that kind of good stuff. And Ali, it's been great. I really appreciate the time.
Thank you for having me, Rob.
It's been a true pleasure.